So how does the analytics feature of Intuiface actually work? Well, it begins with your experiences, which you can see on the left of the diagram. Each individual experience is independently collecting its own set of data, the data you tell it to collect. All of this data, collected by all of your players, are pushed up into the cloud into what is called the Intuiface Data Hub. You can see that here in the middle. The job of the Data Hub is to take all of the player data, collate it, and put it in one place, making it available for analysis. You then have two choices. You can choose to export it to third-party platforms because it is your intent to perform your analytics, the visualization of your data, somewhere outside of Intuiface. Alternatively, you can use Intuiface's own charts and dashboards feature. The majority of our customers go this way because they just don't know a lot about analytics. And with the charts and dashboards feature of Intuiface, we've made it super simple for you to visualize your data, to identify trends, and ultimately to reach some level of business insight. Let's take a little closer look at Intuiface Analytics, break it down into some of the individual capabilities made available to you. We'll start with automatic event capture. What that means is that there are a certain set of events you don't need to tell us to watch for. We will automatically collect information about those events. For example, when does the experience start and stop? What time did you enter, scene, and exit it, which enables us to measure dwell time per scene. And for all of those data points, not just the automatic events, but in fact, any event for which you collect information, there's a lot of information we collect, such as the name of the device, the name of the experience, and much more than that to make sure you have lots of ways to slice and dice your data universally, regardless of what events were triggered to cause that data collection to occur. Every time you collect information about a particular event, what you're creating is a data point. For every event, there's a data point. Data points are comprised of information about that event or about the context around that event. For example, maybe some item was selected in a retail experience. The actual event was selecting that item, and maybe you're collecting information about the item. But perhaps you want to collect additional information as well, such as the weather outside or perhaps a sports score, things that you think might have some impact on the selections made at that kiosk. With Intuiface, you can have an unlimited number of parameters per data point. There is no limit, and every data point can have different parameters. You have total flexibility. One of the nice things about Intuiface Analytics is it doesn't have to be online. Certainly at some point it does need to be online in order for each individual player to upload its data to the Data Hub, as I mentioned earlier. But throughout the day, it is not necessary to be online all the time. It is sufficient to have that occur on occasion, enabling player to purge all of the data it has collected. This means you don't need to have a live internet connection. If one drops, that's okay as well. Intuiface is smart enough to run in an offline environment, in an offline manner, but still give you the ability to ultimately upload that data for analysis. Within Intuiface Analytics, we recognize the notion of a session. Sessions enable you to differentiate one user from another. If you've ever worked with something like web analytics, you're probably very familiar with the notion of a session. Sessions can be easily identified by, for example, the IP address of the user. You can differentiate one user from another, so it's fairly easy with web analytics to differentiate one session from another. What did each individual visitor do during their visit? In other words, what happened during that session? You really ideally want to do that as well with the interactive content you build using Intuiface. That is, you want to differentiate the actions of one user from another, because if you don't, you have a whole mess of actions, but you can't tell who did what, and it makes it hard to understand the individual habits of your target audience. So we introduced the notion of a session. Now, of course, Intuiface does not have ESP. It cannot tell necessarily who's in front of the camera. So sometimes the way you implement sessions needs to account for a little bit of leeway, meaning it's 80% correct, 90% of the time correct. For example, perhaps you have a restart button in your experience. Whenever anybody touches restart, it goes back to the beginning. You can assume a new session. Is that always a new session? Is it really a new unique user? Probably most of the time, which is, I would suspect, good enough. Maybe you have a timeout counter. If nothing happens for a period of time, reset the experience and assume the next section will be a different user, and that would be a new session. So there are ways to infer whether or not a session has begun. Same thing, I imagine, can be done with computer vision to identify different people moving in and out of view. There are various ways to identify the notion of a new session beginning. The beauty with Intuiface is you can do that using multiple methods, ensuring you can differentiate one user from another across all of your players all over the world, no matter how many players you have. When Intuiface collects data, it is compressed before it is uploaded to the data hub. This might seem like a minor point, but we do recognize that some of our customers are working in environments with no network connection. Rather, what they're using are 3G, 4G, perhaps today 5G connections to upload that data, and that's a metered connection. You're possibly paying for the amount of data traveling over that connection, so we do make sure the data is compressed as much as possible to minimize how much bandwidth is actually consumed. Finally, Intuiface Analytics runs on all supported platforms. At the time of this recording, that's 7 different operating systems: Windows, Android, BrightSign, Samsung Tizen, LG WebOS, iOS on the iPad, and the Chrome OS. Any of those 7 platforms supports the Intuiface data collection capability. You can collect information from any experience running on any of those platforms and make it available for analysis. You don't have to know anything about those platforms to use Intuiface Analytics. What kind of information can you collect? In a way, the answer is anything you want. If it's accessible in your Intuiface experience, you can make it a parameter in one of your data points. Broadly speaking, there are 3 classes of data. The first, as you can see the upper left, are the interaction events. These are the explicit things your users are doing. It's the video they choose to watch, the book they choose to read, the scene they choose to visit. There was some explicit interaction event, and you're collecting information about that event. The second class is information about the user. Now, depending on how you set up your experience, you don't know who the user is. But if you set it up in a way that maybe a form is being filled out, or badges are being read, or computer vision is being used to identify age, gender, that sort of thing, then there are certain pieces of information about the user that gives you some sense of who they are, and that helps color the information you're collecting for analytics. Maybe particular people have preferences different from other people, and that would be helpful to know. You can learn that from measuring user information. The final class of information is about the environment, about the location, some context that might influence their choices. I mentioned earlier, for example, the weather or sports scores, things that maybe now seem kind of crazy, but depending on the context of the interaction, perhaps those are true influences, and you need to know that to make educated inferences from the data as you visualize them. Now remember, there are some automatic events, information that Intuiface always captures. By and large, you'll be creating custom events, meaning you identify when data points should be created. What events do you care about, and what information do you want to collect about those events? The majority of the time, you specify when the data is collected. For sure, what you're not doing is having Intuiface just collect a bunch of random data and you hoping there's something valuable in there. What you do is specify only what you care about. And that, broadly speaking, is how Intuiface Analytics works.